Picture this: a bustling school hallway in the heart of Milwaukee lockers, clanging and sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. A brilliant, spirited black girl named Ebony proudly strides to her next class, her braided hair swaying behind her. She has no idea that her life is about to flip upside down right here in these familiar halls when a teacher makes a shocking decision that will leave Ebony broken and humiliated. But what happens next is even more extraordinary. Because when her father learns the truth and steps into the room, everything stops. And that's when the real storm begins. The sun had just risen over Milwaukee, painting the sky with warm streaks of orange and pink that bounced off Lake Michigan in a quiet neighborhood on the city's north side. Ebony Carter was getting ready for school. Her father, James Carter, hummed softly in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a practiced hand. Ebony, 14 years old, clung to a piece of her childhood, with the bright pink backpack she'd had since elementary school. Even though she was taller now, her features more refined. She had radiant brown eyes and a wide grin that seemed to spark at the slightest joke. Her hair was styled into neat box braids that morning, each braid meticulously woven by her Aunt Sabrina over the weekend. Ebony loved the way the braids fell gracefully down her shoulders. She felt confident, elegant, and connected to her heritage. Despite that confidence, Ebony faced the usual teenage anxieties. She had a math test that afternoon and a debate competition coming up. However, she was well prepared thanks to her father's unwavering support. James Carter worked 2 jobs. He was a mechanic during the day, and on some evenings he took on side gigs as an Uber driver. But no matter how early he had to be up, or how exhausted he felt when he got home, he always found time to sit with Ebony and talk about her day. He believed that knowledge was power, and that Ebony's education would open the doors he never had the chance to enter. "That pancake is perfect, Dad," Ebony teased, leaning over the counter to catch a whiff of the sweet, buttery aroma. "Are you going to open your own pancake shop next?" James chuckled, flipping another pancake. "I might. Then I can call it Carter's Creations and have you manage the money." Ebony laughed, lifting a brow. "That sounds like a plan, Dad. But only after I ace my math test." He grinned with paternal pride. "You will, baby girl. You always do." They finished breakfast. Ebony hugged her father goodbye, and she strolled out the front door. The crisp morning air revitalized her, and she felt like nothing could go wrong today. Little did Ebony know, by the time the sun set, her life would never be the same. The bell clanged its usual metallic echo through the corridors of Ronald E. McNair Middle School, named after the famous African-American physicist and NASA astronaut, a name Ebony held in high esteem. Students scurried to their classes, and Ebony caught up with her best friend Tasha near the water fountains. "Ready for the math test?" Tasha asked, hugging her pile of textbooks against her chest. Ebony shrugged. "Exuding confidence, I think. So I studied until midnight. Mr. Alvarez's tests are tough, but not impossible." They parted ways for first period English. Ebony walked into the classroom, nodding politely to her teacher, Ms. Alicia Caldwell. Ms. Caldwell, a woman in her early 40s with sharp features, was known for her strictness and an unyielding adherence to rules. She wore her hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her lips seemed perpetually pressed into a thin line. Most students found Miss Caldwell's class suffocating, but Ebony tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. She often wondered if Miss Caldwell's strictness came from a place of wanting her students to succeed. Class started as usual, with Miss Caldwell calling for silence and instructing the students to open their copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. Ironically, Ebony noted the book's themes of racial injustice and prejudice. Miss Caldwell's eyes briefly settled on Ebony's braided hair, her gaze lingering. Ebony felt uneasy, but she brushed it off. I want a 2-page summary of Chapter 15. Due at the end of class, Ms. Caldwell announced. No excuses. As Ebony flipped open her notebook, she noticed Ms. Caldwell glance her way again with an expression bordering on contempt. The teacher's eyes flicked to Ebony's braids, then flicked away. A chill fluttered through Ebony's stomach. Maybe she's just in a mood today, Ebony told herself. But she couldn't shake the strange feeling. The rest of the class went by in a haze of scribbled notes and underlined sentences, Ms. Caldwell's voice droning about the moral development of Atticus Finch. All Ebony could think about was how her teacher kept looking at her, how it made her feel small, vulnerable, and judged. When the bell rang, Ebony packed her things swiftly and rushed out of the room. She tried to reassure herself that it was just her imagination. At lunchtime, she'd find Tasha and talk about it, maybe laugh it off. But deep down, she felt that something about Miss Caldwell's stares was very real, and it wasn't good. Lunchtime came and went, but Ebony's chance to chat with Tasha never materialized. The cafeteria was too crowded, and Ebony wanted to avoid any confusion about the math test scheduled after lunch. She spent most of the period flipping through her notes, her half-eaten tuna sandwich untouched. Just as she was ready to pack up and head to math class, a school aide approached her table. Ebony Carter. Ebony looked up, slightly startled. Yes, Principal Gomez wants to see you in her office. Her mind raced. Did something happen at home? Did she miss a homework assignment? Ebony slung her backpack over her shoulder and followed the aide through the busy corridor, the boisterous chatter of students slowly fading behind them. Principal Gomez's office was at the end of a long hallway lined with inspirational posters and trophy cases. Ebony had only been to the principal's office once before to receive a certificate for her volunteer work in the school library. She couldn't imagine why she'd be summoned now. When Ebony stepped into the office, she found Miss Caldwell already there, standing rigidly next to the principal's desk. Principal Gomez, a tall woman with a warm smile and salt and pepper hair, nodded at Ebony to have a seat. Ebony's heart pounded. Ms. Caldwell's presence was a red flag. Whatever this was about, it had to do with her English teacher. Ebony Principal Gomez began this. Caldwell has brought a concern to my attention regarding the school dress code. Ebony's mouth felt dry. Dress code. She looked down at her outfit, a simple pair of jeans, a plain lavender tee, and her braids. There was nothing flashy or inappropriate about it, yes. Miss Caldwell interjected coolly, and specifically regarding Ebony's hair. Ebony's pulse raced. She stared at Miss Caldwell, completely taken aback. Miss Caldwell's lips twisted as she spoke again. It's come to my attention that Ebony's braids might not meet the hygiene standards set by our school's code. Shock-numbed Ebony's body. Her braids unhygienic. They were freshly done, clean and well-maintained. I don't understand, Ebony managed to say, forcing her voice to remain calm. What rule did I break? Principal Gomez cleared her throat. According to the dress code guidelines, hair must be kept in a neat, clean fashion that doesn't interfere with the learning environment. Das Cooks. Caldwell is concerned your style might be. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Distracting Ebony felt hot tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back. My hair is neat. It's braided so it won't get in my face, and I wash and condition it regularly. There's nothing unhygienic about it. Principal Gomez nodded slowly. She looked uncertain. I see. Well, Ebony, I'm sorry to pull you from lunch. Miss Caldwell suggested we address this quickly. For now, I think we should let you return to class, and I'll look into the specific policies relief washed over Ebony. But she also sensed Miss Caldwell's frustration at not getting an immediate resolution. The teacher's stare was cold and unwavering. Ebony felt uneasy as she left the office. Something told her this was only the beginning. Math class provided a temporary reprieve, though Ebony couldn't focus on the test as well as she wanted. Her head spun with questions about Ms. Caldwell's accusation. Still, Ebony managed to complete the test. As the final bell rang, she wanted nothing more than to hurry home and talk to her father. Tasha caught up with her at the lockers, but Ebony only had enough time to promise her they'd talk tomorrow, making her way toward the side exit leading to the bus loop. Ebony passed Mrs. Caldwell in the hallway. For a moment, Ebony's heart pounded, half expecting the teacher to call her out or demand an explanation. But Ms. Caldwell did something that took Ebony by surprise. She smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a slow, thin-lipped expression that made Ebony's skin crawl. "Good day, Ebony," Miss Caldwell said. "I trust we won't have any more issues with that hair tomorrow." Ebony swallowed. She forced herself to keep walking, ignoring the ache in her gut. Fear crept in, overshadowing her earlier confusion. How could Miss Caldwell say issues with that hair, as if Ebony's hair were a problem to be fixed? Stepping out of the school, Ebony felt a chill in the autumn air. She wondered if Miss Caldwell might try to escalate the situation, or if the principal would dismiss it. Either way, Ebony knew she had to tell her dad everything that happened. Telling her father was usually comforting, but this time she felt uneasy about how angry he might become. James Carter had a calm demeanor most days, but when it came to protecting his daughter, Ebony had seen his fierce side, and this definitely called for protection. That evening, Ebony paced in the living room, waiting for her father to come home from the mechanic shop. When the door finally opened, James stepped in. Exhaustion etched on his face. He brightened at the sight of Ebony, but sensed immediately that something was wrong. "Ebony, you look troubled," he said, setting his tools down. "What happened?" She wasted no time recounting the day's bizarre events. With each sentence, James's expression hardened. By the time she finished describing how Miss Caldwell had summoned her to the principal's office, James's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He took a deep breath. "That teacher said your braids were unhygienic," he repeated, disbelief thick in his voice. Ebony nodded, tears threatening again. "She said it was a violation of dress code, but I didn't do anything wrong, Dad. My braids are neat and clean." James's voice shook with restrained anger. "I'm going to speak with Principal Gomez first thing tomorrow. This is unacceptable." Ebony swallowed relief and nerves mingling in her chest. "Thank you, Dad." He knelt beside her, his eyes gentle yet determined. "Listen to me, Ebony. You did nothing wrong. Your hair is part of who you are. You're beautiful just the way you are, and no one, no teacher, no principal has the right to make you feel otherwise." Ebony threw her arms around him, burying her face into his shoulder. In that moment, she felt safe again. She trusted her father to handle it. But she also couldn't shake the premonition that Miss Caldwell wouldn't let this go so easily. The next morning, Ebony woke up with a heavy heart. She tugged gently at her braids, recalling how proud she had been of them just days ago. Now they felt like a target on her head. Still, she dressed for school, determined not to let fear overshadow her day. James Carter requested a morning off from the mechanic shop, something he rarely did. A father's fury simmered beneath his calm demeanor as he drove Ebony to school. The car ride was mostly silent, Ebony fiddling with her phone, James gripping the steering wheel. They arrived just before the first bell. Students teemed around the main entrance. James and Ebony went straight to Principal Gomez's office. The secretary asked them to wait for a moment. Ebony's stomach did a flip when she saw Ms. Caldwell exit the principal's office. The teacher shot Ebony a pointed look before greeting James with a steely civility. "Mr. Carter," Ms. Caldwell said politely. "I see you're here about the dress code matter." James gave a curt nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, I am." Miss Caldwell glanced at Ebony, offering a thin-lipped smile. "We just want Ebony to adhere to the school's rules, that's all you understand." I'm sure James opened his mouth to respond, but Principal Gomez emerged, ushering them into her office before he could speak further. Once inside, James refused to sit. He stood towering near the principal's desk. Ebony close by, Principal Gomez. James said, his voice measured. "My daughter told me everything that happened yesterday. I'm here to demand an explanation. Since when are braids considered a dress code violation?" Principal Gomez folded her hands on the desk. "Mr. Carter, the school's dress code states that hairstyles must be neat and not disruptive. Ms. Caldwell has raised concerns about hygiene and possible distraction." James's eyes blazed distraction. In a class reading about racial injustice, a young black girl's braids are a distraction. Does that make sense to you, Principal Gomez? The principal sighed. "Carter, I personally have no issue with Ebony's hair. However, Ms. Caldwell believes Ebony's braids are too long and could pose a hygiene concern if they aren't maintained properly. But Ebony insists they are clean and well kept. So as far as I'm concerned, Ebony is within dress code." Ebony's heart lifted. She wished the conversation ended there, but Miss Caldwell, standing by the wall with arms crossed, quickly interjected. "Principal Gomez, I witnessed Ebony frequently touching and readjusting her braids in class. Other students were distracted. Some teased her about them. Ebony's cheeks burned. That was partly true. Some students had teased her, but it was hardly Ebony's fault. And Ebony touching her hair was not some grand transgression. It was a nervous habit," James scowled. "Then punish the teasers, not my daughter. She has the right to wear her hair in braids." Principal Gomez nodded. "You're correct, Mr. Carter. Ebony will not be penalized." She turned to Ebony. "I hope this resolves the matter. If anyone teases you, please report it. We'll address it accordingly." Ms. Caldwell pursed her lips, clearly displeased. Ebony's father gave the teacher one last stare before guiding Ebony out of the office. As they walked, Ebony's chest felt lighter, though the tension behind them remained thick as tar. For a brief moment, Ebony felt validated, but the days that followed proved that Miss Caldwell wasn't finished. In her English class, Ebony felt singled out. Miss Caldwell seemed to call on her for every challenging question. When Ebony succeeded, Miss Caldwell barely concealed her disdain. When Ebony faltered, Miss Caldwell appeared smug. It was psychological warfare, and Ebony had to endure it in silence. At home, Ebony tried to focus on her homework, but she felt the weight of Miss Caldwell's lingering disapproval. Every time she touched her braids, James noticed his daughter's mood swings. She was quieter, often lost in thought. He did his best to reassure her, but Ebony sensed that, while the immediate threat of punishment for her hair had passed, Ms. Caldwell might be plotting something else. About a week after the initial confrontation, Ebony walked into Ms. Caldwell's class and felt a strange tension in the air. Tasha, seated next to Ebony, gave her a worried glance. Mrs. Caldwell was rummaging through her desk drawers, her face flushed as if she'd been arguing with someone. The air was charged, and Ebony felt a sudden urge to leave. The class began with a pop quiz. Ebony worked diligently, ignoring the rapid beat of her heart. She sensed Miss Caldwell's gaze on her, but she kept her focus on the paper. Halfway through, Ebony needed to sharpen her pencil. She rose quietly to approach the sharpener at the back of the room. Miss Caldwell's voice cut through the silence. "Sit down, Ebony. You shouldn't be interrupting the quiz." Ebony froze, pencil in hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Caldwell, but my pencil broke. I just need to sharpen it." The teacher's eyes flicked with annoyance. "Fine." Quickly, Ebony went to the sharpener, inserted her pencil, and turned the crank. The sudden loud whir shattered the silence of the quiz. Ebony winced, hoping not to draw further ire. As she walked back, she overheard a low conversation from two students in the corner. "Her braids look dumb anyway," one said, snickering. Ebony's cheeks grew hot. She tried to ignore it, but Miss Caldwell's voice rose again. "That's enough." Miss Caldwell snapped, glaring at Ebony, as if the conversation were her fault. Ebony dropped her gaze, tears threatening to form. Why was she being made to feel responsible for others' cruel words? Class ended in a flurry of tension. Ebony hurried out, Tasha on her heels. "Ebony, what's going on? She's been targeting you since you refused to remove your braids." Ebony's voice trembled. I don't know. She just won't let it go. But I can't keep letting her walk all over me." Tasha squeezed Ebony's hand gently. "I've got your back." Everything escalated 2 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon. Ebony would never forget. The day started normal, albeit with Miss Caldwell's cold glances in English class. After school, Ebony stayed behind for a tutoring session in math, hoping to keep her grades top-notch. Around 4 p.m., she headed toward her locker to grab her things. The halls were nearly empty now. Just a few stragglers and teachers finishing up for the day. Ebony was rummaging for her history textbook when Miss Caldwell appeared behind her. Ebony jumped at the sudden voice. "Ebony, I need to speak with you." "Now." The teacher's tone was so firm that Ebony felt a lump lodge in her throat. She hesitated, but followed Miss Caldwell into a nearby empty classroom. The lights were off, sunlight filtering through the blinds. Miss Caldwell closed the door behind them. Ebony's heart hammered as Miss Caldwell walked toward her, an odd desperation in her eyes. "I tried to be reasonable," Miss Caldwell said, her voice tense. "But you've forced my hand. Those braids are a violation of hygiene, and you continue to wear them despite my warnings." Ebony's throat constricted with fear. "Mijos," Caldwell Principal Gomez said, "my braids are allowed. I haven't broken any rule." The teacher's eyes glinted with a strange fervor. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a pair of scissors. Ebony's eyes widened in horror. "No." Ebony gasped, stepping back. "You can't." But Miss Caldwell lunged forward. The next moments were a blur of terror. Ebony tried to run, but Miss Caldwell grabbed a handful of braids, her grip shockingly strong. Ebony screamed, her voice echoing in the empty hallway beyond. "Stop, let me go." Miss Caldwell's hand trembled. "This is for your own good," she hissed. "We don't need a lawsuit over your so-called hygiene problem." Before Ebony could fully break free, Miss Caldwell had the scissors in Ebony's hair. She cut through several braids, the sharp blade making an awful crunching sound. Ebony felt a jolt of pain and an onrush of indignity. She screamed again, tears flooding her eyes. The teacher's actions became more frantic, almost panicked, as if possessed by the need to remove every braided strand. Ebony thrashed, but Miss Caldwell managed to yank her into a nearby chair. She grabbed an electric clipper from the drawer. God only knew why she had it there, and flicked it on the buzzing sound, magnifying Ebony's terror. "No, stop." "Ebony," cried, voice hoarse. She felt the vibration on her scalp as Mrs. Caldwell shaved away the remains of her beautiful braids. It couldn't have been more than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. When Miss Caldwell finally released her, Ebony stumbled away, tears rolling down her face. Her scalp felt cold, exposed. Braided pieces lay scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. Ebony sobbed, hugging her arms around herself. Miss Caldwell, breathing heavily, seemed shocked at her own actions. She stared at Ebony as if she'd just realized the horror of what she'd done. Just then, the door flung open. In a flash, a figure stood there, panting, as if he'd sprinted down the hallway. James Carter, Ebony's father, and he looked like a force of nature. James had come to pick Ebony up from her math tutoring. When he didn't see her by the entrance, he asked a staff member who mentioned Ebony might be at her locker. As James walked the halls, Ebony's scream had drawn him. One look inside that classroom, and he felt a surge of rage unlike anything he'd known. His baby girl was on the floor, tears streaming down her face, hair shorn in uneven patches. Miss Caldwell stood frozen, the clippers still humming in her trembling hand. For a moment, time stood still. James's voice was a low thunder. "What did you?" to Miss Caldwell gasped, dropping the clippers as if they burned her. It's not what it looks like." James rushed to Ebony, cradling her in his arms. She sobbed against his chest. He saw the scattered braids on the floor, felt his daughter trembling. A protective fury roared through him, but Ebony's sobs demanded his immediate comfort. He held her gently, then turned to Miss Caldwell, his eyes blazing with a righteous wrath. "You assaulted my child." Miss Caldwell opened her mouth, but no words came. She took a step back, nearly tripping over a desk. She was. The braids were. "Don't say another word." James snarled. His voice echoed in the quiet classroom, each syllable a threat. Miss Caldwell's face paled. She looked ready to bolt. The commotion had attracted a crowd. Tasha, who had stayed late for cheer. Practice stood at the door, her hands over her mouth in shock. Another teacher, Mr. Alvarez, hovered behind her, appalled. Within seconds, Principal Gomez arrived along with a security guard. Gasps filled the air as they took in the horrifying scene. Ebony half-shaved, scalp sobbing series. Caldwell eyes wide with panic. Hair clipper at her feet. Principal Gomez's voice trembled. "Oh my God, what happened here?" James stood, fury radiating from every pore. "Arrest her," he demanded, pointing at Miss Caldwell. "She attacked my daughter." At that, Miss Caldwell broke from her paralysis and tried to run. The security guard quickly intercepted her at the door, restraining her. Miss Caldwell struggled, spewing half-formed excuses. But no one was listening. All eyes were on Ebony, who clung to her father. Her world shattered. Paramedics were called, as well as the Milwaukee Police Department. Ebony, distraught and in shock, was led to the nurse's office, where James stayed close by, refusing to leave her side. The school corridors buzzed with gossip and horror. Word spread like wildfire. Miss Caldwell had forcibly shaved a student's hair. Even students who barely knew Ebony were outraged. Tasha hovered near the nurse's office, anxious for Ebony's well-being. Principal Gomez sat in her office, head in her hands, grappling with the knowledge that a teacher under her watch had committed a vicious assault. When the police arrived, they took statements from Ebony and the witnesses. The paramedics checked Ebony for injuries, noting cuts on her scalp and bruises on her arms from Mrs. Caldwell's rough grasp. James bristled at every detail. Each cut and bruise another brand of injustice burned into his mind. Miss Caldwell was placed under arrest, handcuffed, and led out of the school. She sobbed incoherently, trying to give an explanation that no one wanted to hear. Onlookers, including teachers and students, watched in silence, shock and disgust etched on their faces. A swirl of media interest began almost immediately. By the time Ebony left the nurse's office with her father, a local news van from WISN 12 had parked outside the reporter, ready to pounce on any statement. James shielded Ebony, careful to protect her from the cameras. He was determined to get his daughter away from the chaos, focusing solely on her healing. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Carter, what happened in there? Ebony, are you okay?" But James refused to speak. He guided his daughter to his car, tears glistening in his own eyes now that Ebony wasn't looking at him. Inside the car, Ebony curled into herself. Her tears had stopped, but a hollow ache took their place. She stared at her reflection in the window, her scalp uneven patches of hair left over from the forced shaving. She felt humiliated, violated, and powerless. Her father reached over, covering her hand gently. "We'll fix this," he whispered, his voice taut with emotion. "I promise." That night, Ebony and James sat in the living room silent, except for the TV news coverage that repeated the horrifying headline, "Teacher arrested for shaving student's hair in alleged racially motivated attack." Images of Ebony's braids on the floor and Ms. Caldwell being escorted in handcuffs flashed on the screen. Ebony turned away, unable to bear it. James clicked the TV off. "That's enough," he said softly. "You need rest." Ebony stared at the floor. "Dad, I feel so ugly." James's heart shattered. He gathered Ebony in his arms again. "Never say that you're beautiful. What she did was evil. But it doesn't change who you are inside. We'll help you heal." Tears rolled down Ebony's cheeks, but she nodded, clinging to her father like a lifeline. James couldn't recall the last time he'd felt so helpless and furious all at once. The next day, a storm of social media outrage broke loose. Ebony's story spread, fueled by raw images posted by students who had witnessed the aftermath. Hashtags like "Justice for Ebony" and "Stop Hair Discrimination" trended locally on Twitter and Instagram. Parents demanded answers, calling for Miss Caldwell's immediate termination and the revocation of her teaching license. Civil rights groups in Milwaukee rallied behind Ebony, condemning the incident as racially charged assault. Meanwhile, James fielded calls from reporters, activists, and lawyers offering their services pro bono. He wasn't sure how to navigate it all, but he knew Ebony needed justice, and that Ms. Caldwell needed to be held accountable. Ebony spent the next several days at home. James had taken leave from work to stay with her. They visited the doctor to ensure Ebony had no infections on her scalp. The physical damage would heal soon enough, but the emotional trauma loomed large. Outside their home, supporters gathered, leaving flowers and cards. Some just wanted to offer a hug or a kind word. Ebony was overwhelmed by the community's love, but she still felt a deep shame whenever she touched her head. The braids she had so lovingly maintained were gone, stolen from her by hatred and ignorance. The community's response grew. A peaceful protest was arranged in front of Ronald E. McNair Middle School. Parents, students, and activists marched with signs that read, "Hands off our hair, and hair discrimination is racism." Tasha and other classmates who adored Ebony spoke out publicly. Even Principal Gomez joined the protest, tears in her eyes as a sign of solidarity. In the midst of this, Ebony discovered something that rattled her to the core. Ms. Caldwell's online posts. A group of Ebony's friends found Ms. Caldwell's old social media comments laced with bigoted remarks about black people, particularly regarding cultural hairstyles. Her posts revealed a long-standing prejudice. Ms. Caldwell had once written that braids look dirty and afro hair is unprofessional. The discovery made Ebony's father's blood boil. This was never about hygiene, James said, scanning the screenshots with a bitter fury. She's been a racist bigot all along. Ebony sank into the couch, tears welling again. I can't believe she was teaching me to kill a mockingbird while hating me for my hair. James's jaw tightened. Karma is coming for her. The courtroom was colder than Ebony expected, too polished, too clinical for the raw emotions she carried inside. It had been weeks since the incident, but time had done little to soften the trauma. Ebony's braids, once symbols of beauty and culture, still haunted her dreams in severed strands. Each time she looked in the mirror, her short, uneven regrowth whispered that the past couldn't be undone. But maybe justice could be found. She clutched her father's hand as they walked into the courthouse. James Carter, calm and steady on the outside, radiated a quiet storm. He wore a charcoal suit that didn't quite hide the calluses of a working man's life, but it was the fire in his eyes that commanded the room. They weren't alone. Reporters gathered at the courthouse steps, lenses clicking, as Ebony stepped past them in a fitted black dress and a simple beanie. Her lawyer, Monique Richards, walked beside them, sharp-eyed. Composed and battle-tested, Monique had taken on cases of racial injustice before, but this one had gripped the city's conscience. Inside the seats were full. Classmates, teachers, concerned, citizens, protesters and supporters stood in solidarity outside with signs that read, "Hair is culture. Justice for Ebony Stop Policing." Black hair. Ebony's stomach twisted as she caught sight of Miss Caldwell at the defense table. The once stern teacher now looked diminished. Her bun was gone, replaced by hastily brushed waves. She wore no makeup, her face pale and drawn. But it wasn't guilt on her face, it was fear. Not fear of what she'd done, but of what it was now costing her. The judge entered. Everyone stood, and the trial began. The prosecution opened first, laying out the facts in crisp, undeniable order. A student forcibly assaulted by a teacher in a locked classroom, physical evidence of the cut braids, emotional trauma documented by a licensed therapist, statements from eyewitnesses, students, faculty security. Monique stood when it was her turn and spoke with quiet power. This is not just about hair. It is about control. It is about the violent enforcement of one woman's prejudice against a young black girl's identity. What Ms. Caldwell did was not a misunderstanding. It was an assault, a hate crime, and a betrayal of everything a teacher is supposed to be. The courtroom was silent. Then Ebony was called. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the witness stand. Her knees felt weak, but Monique's encouraging nod from the table steadied her. She spoke slowly at first, voice tight with nerves. But as the questions came, so did her strength. She recounted the day of the assault in vivid detail, how Ms. Caldwell had cornered her, dragged her into the empty room, and muttered about hygiene and distraction before cutting, then shaving her hair, while Ebony screamed. Her voice trembled, but she did not cry. She told me it was for my own good. Ebony said, her eyes locked on the jury. But it wasn't about hygiene. It was about power. She hated my hair because she didn't understand it, because it scared her, because it didn't look like hers. James clenched his fists as he watched his daughter speak. She was no longer just his child. She was the voice of every black girl who had ever been told their natural self was unprofessional, distracting, or wrong. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. They tried to paint Ebony as defiant, overly sensitive, even misunderstood. They suggested she had a pattern of minor disruptions in class. They brought up her social media, trying to find anything to undermine her, but nothing stuck. Ebony remained poised, answering every question with clarity, and when asked if she had ever given permission for her hair to be touched, she said, without blinking, "No, never." She didn't ask. She just took. Ms. Caldwell eventually took the stand. Her lawyer coaxed her into explaining the hygiene concern, but her words fell flat. She stammered, contradicted herself, and then, under pressure, snapped. "I was trying to help." She shouted at one point. She didn't follow rules. She looked unkempt. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The prosecutor rose calmly and read aloud her old social media posts, the ones where she called braids dirty and said, "Afro hair looked wild. You called black hair unprofessional. You wrote that it should be banned from schools." "Do you remember that, Miss Caldwell?" She flinched. It was taken out of context, but the damage was done. The jury saw through the polished words. They saw the malice, the microaggressions that had simmered for years beneath her professional exterior. She hadn't snapped that day. She had simply revealed who she really was. After closing arguments, the jury retired. Ebony sat with her father, squeezing his hand as the hours ticked by. She felt sick, drained, but something inside her had begun to settle, a quiet certainty. She had told the truth. She had stood tall. She had fought. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom held its breath. We, the jury, find the defendant, Alicia Caldwell, guilty on all counts, battery, assault, and hate crime enhancement. Ms. Caldwell's head dropped. Her shoulders slumped. Her lawyer looked defeated. Ebony closed her eyes as tears fell. Not of sadness, but of release. Justice long denied to so many girls like her had been served today. James wrapped his arms around her, whispering, "You did it, baby girl. You stood up." Ebony nodded, the weight of the world easing slightly off her chest. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for every voice that had been silenced. And now the world was finally listening. In the weeks leading to the trial, more revelations about Ms. Caldwell leaked. Former students came forward with stories of microaggressions, racial slurs muttered under her breath, unfair grading practices. The school district launched an internal investigation, swiftly terminating Ms. Caldwell's employment. The Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office prepared an even stronger case, adding potential hate crime enhancements to Ms. Caldwell's charges. James watched the news each night, seeing Miss Caldwell's mugshot flash across the screen. He felt a grim satisfaction. The teacher who had terrorized his daughter was now ostracized, her career in shambles, her face synonymous with hatred and cruelty. Yet none of it erased the nightmares Ebony endured. Some nights she woke up in tears, reliving the moment she felt the clippers against her scalp. James did his best to comfort her. He arranged therapy sessions, assuring Ebony that professional help was a sign of strength, not weakness. Ebony initially resisted not wanting to talk about the incident, but after a few sessions, she found it cathartic. She spoke about her anger, her lingering fear in classrooms, and the betrayal by someone who was supposed to be a caretaker and mentor. One rainy afternoon, Ebony returned from therapy and found her father waiting with a surprise, a box of handmade scarves from a local group of African American women who heard her story. Each scarf featured unique prints and patterns celebrating African heritage. Ebony's eyes shone with tears this time from gratitude. She wrapped one around her head, feeling not shame, but the power of shared culture and support. The day of sentencing dawned gray and still. The sky over Milwaukee hung heavy with low clouds, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Inside the courthouse, the air was electric, thick with anticipation, nerves, and the finality that only a courtroom verdict can bring. Ebony Carter sat beside her father in the front row of the packed gallery. She wore a simple black blazer and slacks, her natural curls left uncovered for the first time since the assault. Her new growth framed her face like a crown, soft but defiant. Her expression was calm, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. She had already testified. She had already endured the media, the fear, the whispers. Today wasn't about telling her story again. Today was about seeing the system affirm it, seeing the law stand where it had once been silent. Monique Richards, their attorney, leaned over and whispered, "No matter what the sentence is, the fact that this courtroom is full, that your story is on record, that this verdict was reached, that matters." Ebony nodded slowly. She understood. But deep inside, she also knew closure wasn't a concept. It was a choice. And today, she was going to choose it. Across the aisle, Alicia Caldwell sat at the defense table, her figure shrunken, her jaw tense. The once confident teacher who had stood in front of classrooms with self-righteous authority now looked like a ghost of herself. Her hands were folded tightly, knuckles white. Her legal team barely met her eyes anymore. She knew what was coming. Everyone did. The judge, a stern black woman named Judge Lenora Hastings, entered the courtroom and took her seat. The room rose, then sat the wood of the benches, creaking under collective pressure. Court is now in session for sentencing in the case of the state of Wisconsin versus Alicia Caldwell. The bailiff announced. Judge Hastings glanced over her glasses at both tables before beginning. "This case has gripped our city, not just because of the crime committed, but because of what it represents. A teacher entrusted with the safety, dignity, and growth of her students abused that trust in a brutal, humiliating, and racially charged way." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. She did not act out of a moment of panic. She acted from prejudice, from a belief that her authority granted her power over identity, over culture, over a child's body. Ms. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes welled, but she remained silent. "I have read every statement submitted," the judge continued, "from the victim, from her family, from the community. And I have reviewed the defense's request for leniency, citing stress and declining mental health." She paused, then said plainly, "But stress is not a license to dehumanize, and mental fatigue is not a defense for hate." The courtroom held its breath as Judge Hastings delivered the sentence. Alicia Caldwell is hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison for felony battery, with an additional 3 years probation following release. The hate crime enhancement shall remain on her record as a permanent felony classification. She will lose her teaching license. She will not be eligible for parole until at least 3 years have been served. Gasps filled the room. Some cried. Others clapped quietly, not out of joy, but relief. Caldwell let out a choked sob. Her attorney placed a hand on her back, but she didn't respond. Her career was over. Her name would be remembered, not for lessons taught, but for the pain inflicted. She was escorted out in handcuffs, avoiding the gaze of Ebony and her father. James placed a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. "She's gone," he whispered. "It's over." Ebony exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling, with the weight of months finally lifting. Outside the courthouse, A sea of cameras and microphones awaited. Ebony stepped forward this time. Not hiding, not flinching. The crowd quieted as she cleared her throat and began to speak. This wasn't just about hair. It was about identity. Safety and the right to exist in your skin without fear of being punished for it. What Miss Caldwell did to me was rooted in hate. But what I stand here with now is strength, and I hope every student, every girl who looks like me, knows that we are not the problem, we are the power. Applause broke out louder this time. Reporters shouted questions, but Ebony and James turned to walk away. They had said what needed to be said. Now they could begin again. In the weeks following the trial, Ebony found a sense of closure. She still had rough days, flinching at loud buzzing noises, feeling anxious around certain authority figures. But therapy helped. Her father's unwavering love helped Tasha's friendship, helped news outlets covered the story extensively, often labeling it a watershed moment in Milwaukee's conversation about racial bias in schools. The district implemented new training programs, working with civil rights organizations to educate staff about cultural sensitivity. Ebony became something of a local figure, her testimony inspiring policy changes to protect students' rights to cultural expression. Meanwhile, Mrs. Caldwell awaited sentencing. She could face years in prison. She'd lost her career, her reputation, and any shred of respect within the community. This was the karmic blow that James had promised. Hate had led Miss Caldwell down a path of self-destruction. Ebony, now 15, began to regrow her hair in a short, curly style. She adored seeing the natural texture come in something she hadn't worn since she was a little girl. She felt like she was rediscovering herself, embracing each curl as a testament to her resilience. One afternoon, Ebony and James visited the Ronald E. McNair Middle School at the request of Principal Gomez. It was a quiet Sunday. No students around. The principal greeted them with a bittersweet smile. "I wanted to show you something," Principal Gomez said, leading them to a wall near the school library. A mural had been painted there, depicting a diverse group of students with various hairstyles, afros, braids, ponytails, buzz cuts, all under the banner, "We Stand Together." In the center stood a figure reminiscent of ebony hair, short but proud eyes, shining with determination. Ebony's eyes filled with tears. She recognized her own silhouette, the strength she never knew she had until she was forced to fight for it. James placed a hand on her shoulder. They looked at each other, father and daughter, united in a moment of triumph that was birthed from tragedy. Sentencing day arrived. The judge handed Miss Caldwell a prison term of 5 years plus mandatory counseling. She would also lose her teaching license permanently. As Ebony and James watched the proceedings from the gallery, they felt a grim sense of resolution. Miss Caldwell, once so rigid and controlled, wept openly as the judge read her sentence. She tried to apologize, to claim she'd had a mental breakdown, but the judge was unsympathetic. The harm done was too severe, too racially charged to be dismissed as mere mental distress. Outside the courthouse, Ebony faced a sea of cameras again. This time she felt a steadiness within her. She stood beside her father, her new short curls glinting in the sunlight, and made a short statement. "I hope this verdict sends a message that no one should ever be targeted, humiliated, or hurt for who they are. My hair is part of me, my culture, my identity, my pride. It shouldn't be up for debate. I thank everyone who supported me and helped bring justice. But let this not just be about me. Let it be a reminder that we must protect every student's right to feel safe and respected." Applause broke out among the crowd, tears shining in the eyes of those who had followed her story. James pulled Ebony into a hug, whispering, "I'm proud of you, baby girl." Life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy for Ebony. She transferred to a different school, seeking a fresh start. She joined a local cultural club that celebrated African heritage, where she learned more about the history of braids and natural hair in the black community. Her braids were coming back in, but she alternated between protective styles, and her natural curls finding confidence in the versatility of her hair. James returned to his mechanic job, his spirit a bit lighter. He'd been weighed down by guilt, feeling he couldn't protect Ebony when it mattered most. But Ebony reminded him that he was her hero, the one who rushed in to save her, the one who fought tirelessly for her justice. Tasha remained Ebony's loyal friend, even though they attended different schools now. She visited, often bringing Ebony the latest gossip. They giggled about typical teenage stuff, crushes, music, Instagram filters, allowing Ebony to reclaim the simple joys she'd nearly lost under the surface. Ebony knew she'd never be the same carefree girl she was before Ms. Caldwell's assault. The trauma had hardened parts of her, made her more wary of authority figures, but it also ignited a spark of activism, a desire to speak out when she saw something wrong. She joined a youth council in Milwaukee, dedicated to addressing racial inequities in education. She used her voice to advocate for others, determined that no one else endure what she had. Though Ebony tried not to dwell on Ms. Caldwell's fate, news found its way to her. Ms. Caldwell struggled in prison, reportedly ostracized by fellow inmates who despised her crime against a child. She wrote letters to the local newspaper, claiming she was misunderstood, that her mental health had deteriorated due to personal stress. Few sympathized. The courts had decided her punishment was just. Her family distanced themselves, ashamed of her actions. The teacher who once believed she was superior found herself alone, consumed by the consequences of her prejudice. In an ironic twist of fate, Ms. Caldwell was forced to reflect on the same themes she had taught in To Kill a Mockingbird, themes she had evidently failed to understand. It was a bitter lesson, but karma had indeed come full circle. Months turned into a year. Ebony's hair grew longer, thick and healthy. She felt excitement for the future. On her 15th birthday, James surprised her by inviting Aunt Sabrina to style her hair again. As Sabrina's fingers worked through Ebony's curls, twisting them into fresh braids, Ebony felt a swirl of emotions, pride, joy, and resilience. Each braid symbolized a piece of her identity, reclaimed. When Sabrina finished, Ebony stared in the mirror at her reflection. She saw not a victim, but a survivor, a warrior even. She touched the braids, gingerly remembering the day Ms. Caldwell tried to strip them away from her. That memory no longer held the same power over her. It was still painful, but it was also a reminder of how strong she had become. Ebony smiled, and James, standing in the doorway, returned it, ready for the next chapter. He asked softly, "Absolutely." Ebony replied, turning to face him, "I'm ready to shine again." What began as a horrific violation turned into an unforgettable journey of triumph and transformation. Ebony Carter, once an ordinary middle school student in Milwaukee, found herself at the heart of a case that exposed an ugly truth about prejudice, only to emerge stronger, bolder, and deeply inspired to stand up for herself and others through a father's unwavering love, a community's outpouring of support, and the mighty wheels of justice. Ebony proved that no one can strip away your dignity without facing the consequences. In the end, Caldwell's hateful actions led to her downfall, offering a stark lesson that racism carries a price. If this story moved you, please share it with friends and family. hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of courage and justice. Together, let's continue to stand against discrimination in all its forms.